Like levels, grids provide organization and structure to your project. Where levels were horizontal datum elements cutting through the building at a certain height, grids are vertical datum elements that are located at certain locations along the building. Grids are used typically to locate where the columns occur in your projects, and they provide key points of reference for things like views and sheets. Unlike levels, not all buildings need grids. For example, most residential projects don't have any need for a column grid. Most commercial projects, on the other hand, do have column grids. Therefore, the type of project that you're creating will dictate your need for grids. Now, I'm in a project called Grids, and I'm looking at floor plan level 1, and I'm going to go here to the Architecture tab and click on the Grid tool. It's located here on the Datum panel. When I click the Grid tool, there are a few different shapes you can create, and I'm going to just stick with simple straight lines for this example. And for my first example, I'm just going to draw a grid out here off to the side. Now, I click my first point down here, and the second point can be anywhere I like. In fact, it can be at any angle, but I'm going to just draw it straight up to stay parallel with the building and click my second point. Now, what you'll notice right away is that Revit creates a grid bubble at the second end. The first end has no bubble, the second end has the bubble, and it automatically numbered it as grid number 1. The presence of the bubble is controlled by this little checkbox right here. So if I uncheck, that will hide that bubble. If I check it again, it will display it. The same was true down here. Check, it will display it. Uncheck, it will hide it. Now, it turns out that same trick works with levels. So if you watch the previous movie, we talked about levels, you can actually check and uncheck whether or not you want to show the level annotation on either end of the level datum. So most of the features of grids work with levels and vice versa. Now, let me cancel out of the command for a moment and select this grid, and I'm going to simply delete it. Now, the reason I want to delete it is I want to talk about how Revit numbers grids. So I'm going to go back to the Datum panel, click the Grid tool again, and this time I'm going to click my first point below the building but inside the wall here. So if you're not careful, it'll snap right to the wall. I don't want to snap it to the wall. I want to bring it inside a little bit, click my first point, pull it straight up parallel to the wall, and click again. And the reason I wanted to do it that way is notice that it remembers that the next number in sequence is number 2. So regardless of the fact that I've deleted grid 1, it still remembers that it's grid 2. Now, this is really important. It's important if I wanted this one to actually be 1. It's also important if I want to use letters here instead. So let me show you how we can change this before we continue. You see where it says Edit Parameter right here when you put your mouse right over it? All you got to do is click, and it will make that editable text. And I'm going to change this to capital A to go with letters in this direction. Now, if I continue, and I'll zoom back out to do this, line up right here, just like levels, I can line up with the neighboring grid, snap it at both ends, line up, snap it at both ends. Notice that I'm getting A, then B, then C, and then here's D, and then here's E. We're going to fine-tune the positions of these grids later. So for right now, I just kind of want to rough them in about the locations that I'm interested in. Let me do the same thing down here. I'm going to come inside this exterior wall, click, but here I want to stop. Before I continue, I want to click right on letter F, and I don't want that to be F. I want to go back to numbers now. I want to make that number 1, and then I'll continue. Here's the next one. There's number 2. Here's my next one. Here's number 3. And finally, here's number 4. Just like levels, we have lots of the same grips on these grids. I'm going to click my Modify tool to cancel out of the command, or if you prefer, you can press the Escape key twice. Just like levels, if you select one of these grids, that little open circle appears at the end, and you can start to drag these, and they drag together as one. Now notice that this one I stopped a little short. It won't do that. It'll drag all by itself. However, if I bring it all the way out here and snap it, now it'll automatically lock and they'll work together. So it's real easy to fix that if you accidentally make one that's too short. All you got to do is drag it until it snaps to its neighbor, and it will take care of the rest. As I said, I've only roughed in the grids, and I'm going to kind of leave them like this for now. We're going to clean that up in the next movie. But I want to just show you a new feature here in 2013. In really complex commercial buildings, you sometimes have a really complicated grid. And Revit 13 has included this new multi-segment grid feature. And if I click on that, that's going to take me into something called sketch mode. Now, I don't really want to get into the details of sketch mode yet. We're going to talk about that in great detail in a future chapter. But for right now, I'm just going to stick with the straight line tool that's right here. And I'm just going to draw a couple shapes like so. It doesn't really matter what the shape is. You can just draw 2 or 3 or 4 segments here. And then click this big green checkbox to finish the edit mode. And what I'll get is a continuous grid object, but it has this irregular shape. So that's going to be really helpful in those complex buildings that have a more complicated column grid. In this particular case, I don't really need that grid, so I'm actually going to delete it, but I did want to point out that new feature to you. So it's not necessary that you set up your grids right away, but it can be a good idea to get them configured in your project as early as possible. Your column grid in a commercial project is a pretty important part of the building, so having those grids and columns located early on can be a big help. But remember, like all things in Revit, we can always modify it later. And in fact, the subject of the next movie is we're going to take this starting column grid that we've begun here, and we're going to position them all much more precisely relative to the surrounding building geometry.